ever catch yourself being your own worst critic? Like there's this voice in your head always ready to point out what's wrong. Yeah, you're not alone.
Today, we're really diving deep into something universal, those negative thoughts.
Hmm.
But the good news, we're not just going to analyze the problem.
We're going to give you actionable strategies so you can actually conquer those thoughts and start building a more, empowering inner monologue.
We're going to be checking out insights from some experts, and we'll hear a really relatable story about a woman named Sarah who managed to break free from this pretty intense cycle of negativity.
But first, let's start with the basics. Why is it so important to even pay attention to these negative thoughts? Isn't it easier to just, brush them off?
Well, it's tempting to just ignore them, but the fascinating thing is our brains are kind of hardwired to focus on the negative. It's like this survival mechanism from our ancestors always scanning for threats.
Right.
The downside is that we often overestimate risks, and we get stuck in these what-if loops, even if those worries aren't based on, any sort of reality.
So it's like our brains are playing these prehistoric greatest hits on repeat, even though the danger's not really there anymore.
Exactly, and if we don't learn to recognize these thought patterns and manage them, that little flicker of negativity, it can spiral into this full-blown wildfire. And that impacts everything, our mood, our relationships, even our ability to reach our full potential.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So awareness is that crucial first step, right? We need to kind of become aware of those negative thoughts before they have a chance to take root and grow.
And this reminds me of Sarah's story. It sounds like she was stuck in this loop of negative self-talk, and it was really affecting her whole life. So tell me more about what was going on with her.
Yeah, so Sarah's experience it's incredibly common. She'd wake up every morning with this sense of dread, thinking what if today is just a bad day? And that negativity, it just snowballed from there.
Ugh. I think we've all been there. Just that feeling of anticipating the worst before the day even begins.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
The more we focus on what could go wrong, the more likely we are to kind of perceive those negative outcomes, even if, they wouldn't have happened otherwise.
Wow, that's kind of scary when you think about it. We're almost willing negativity into existence.
So how did Sarah start to break free from that cycle? Was it just a matter of thinking, positive thoughts? Because that always seems, easier said than done, right?
You're right. It's not as simple as flipping a switch. For Sarah, the turning point came when she started keeping a thought journal.
Okay.
She began to write down every negative thought that, that popped into her head, no matter how insignificant it seemed.
Interesting. Just the act of writing those thoughts down, how did that help Sarah?
It created a sense of distance and objectivity.
Okay.
It's like she was taking those negative thoughts out of her head and putting them on trial.
Okay. I like where this is going. So instead of letting these thoughts swirl around in her mind unchecked, she was forcing them to confront the evidence or lack thereof.
Precisely. And that's a key step in breaking free from their grip. By externalizing those thoughts, we can start to see them for what they often are. Distortions, assumptions, or just plain old habits, not facts.
That's a really powerful distinction. So awareness is key, and then putting those thoughts on trial, so to speak. But what happens when those negative thoughts just keep coming back, even after we've, exposed their flimsy arguments?
Well, that's where the next level of this whole mental game comes in. Replacement.
Okay.
It's not enough to just challenge those negative thoughts,
Right.
We have to actually replace them with more empowering alternatives.
Okay, so we're talking about a full-on mental makeover. But what does an empowering thought actually, what does that look like? And how do we make those positive thoughts stick when that negative voice is so darn persistent?
Yeah, it's like learning a new language. At first, it takes this conscious effort to translate those old negative phrases into something more constructive.
Right.
For example, instead of thinking, I'm going to mess this up, you can try reframing it as, I'm still learning, and that's okay. Yep. I'm open to, making mistakes and growing from them.
So it's about acknowledging the challenge without letting that fear of failure kind of paralyze us.
Exactly. And here's where Sarah's story takes this kind of interesting turn. When she started journaling and challenging those negative thoughts, she realized that a lot of her negativity stemmed from this really deep-seated fear of not being good enough, especially at work.
Yeah.
That feeling of being an imposter is so relatable, even when, logically you're capable.
Absolutely. But Sarah decided to, like, fight back against those imposter thoughts.
Right.
Whenever that voice would whisper, "You're not qualified for this," she would consciously, like, counter it with evidence from her own life. Times she had succeeded, skills she had developed, positive feedback she had received.
So it's like she was building a case file of her own accomplishments to combat those negative charges.
Precisely. She was actively replacing those self-doubting narratives with evidence of her own, strength and resilience. And over time, that consistent effort started to really shift her whole mindset.
That's such an inspiring example of how we can like retrain our brains. But I imagine it takes a lot of, I don't know, discipline to consistently choose those positive thoughts, especially when life throws, curveballs our way.
You're absolutely right. It's an ongoing practice. And that's why, in addition to awareness, challenging, and replacing, it's helpful to have like some other tools in our arsenal. One that's incredibly powerful is mindfulness.
Mindfulness. I've heard that word a lot, but honestly, I'm not sure I fully get it. How does that play into this whole thought transformation process? Is it about, meditating for hours in a silent room?
Not necessarily. Mindfulness at its core is about developing this different kind of relationship with our thoughts. Instead of getting, swept away by them, we learn to like observe them without judgment, like watching clouds drift by in the sky.
So it's like we're creating some like mental space between ourselves and those thoughts, almost like we're hitting the pause button on that negative soundtrack.
Exactly. And here's how Sarah incorporated mindfulness into her daily life. She realized that her most negative thoughts tended to pop up during her morning commute.
Okay.
So she decided to turn that time into this mindfulness practice. Instead of, ruminating on her to-do list or worrying about potential problems, she'd focus on her breath, noticing the sensations of each inhale and exhale.
So simple, yet so powerful. Did she find that actually helped her quiet those negative thoughts?
Absolutely. By grounding herself in the present moment, she was training her mind to let go of those worries that were hijacking her attention. And as she practiced mindfulness more consistently, she found that she was, less reactive to negative thoughts throughout the day. It was like she was building a muscle of mental resilience.
Okay, this is all starting to make sense. We're not trying to completely silence those negative voices. We're learning to manage them, to see them for what they are, and to, choose a more empowering perspective. So we've got awareness, challenging, replacing, and mindfulness. Is there anything else we can do to cultivate a more positive, mental landscape?
This has been so eye-opening. We've covered recognizing negative thoughts, questioning how valid they really are, replacing them with more empowering ones, and using mindfulness to just create some distance. So what else can we do to kind of cultivate a more positive inner world?
Well, this last piece might seem kind of obvious, but it's definitely easier said than done. Pay attention to the information you're taking in and the people you're surrounding yourself with.
So curating a more, I don't know, a more positive environment for our minds.
Exactly. Think of it this way. If you're constantly bombarded with negativity, whether it's, from the news or social media or even certain people in your life, it's going to be that much harder to maintain that positive mindset you've been working on.
It's like trying to grow a garden in toxic soil. No matter how much you water those seeds of positivity, they're going to have a hard time taking root if the environment isn't right.
Exactly. And remember, Sarah, she realized that her habit of scrolling through news headlines before bed was actually fueling her anxiety. She was starting her days already feeling behind and overwhelmed.
Yeah, I've been guilty of that myself. Sometimes those news alerts just feel like a punch to the gut, especially right before bed. What did Sarah do to change that?
Well, she made a conscious effort to limit her exposure to negativity, especially in the evenings. She started reading more uplifting books before bed, and she unfollowed accounts that triggered her anxiety.
So it's not about burying our heads in the sand and just ignoring all the problems of the world, right? It's about being more mindful of what we allow into our mental space.
Precisely. It's about being, it's about being selective with our information diet and, choosing sources that actually nourish our minds instead of depleting them.
This has been such a helpful reminder that, we have more power than we think, especially when it comes to shaping our thoughts and really our overall well-being. We don't have to be at the mercy of our negativity.
You got it. And remember, this is a journey, not a destination. There will be days when those negative thoughts feel louder, but with practice, you'll get better at recognizing them, challenging them, and choosing a more empowering path.
It's like we're learning a new skill. The more we practice, the easier it gets. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. What's one small step you can take today to start cultivating a more positive and supportive inner world? Maybe it's starting a thought journal like Sarah did, or incorporating a few minutes of mindfulness into your day, or even just, simply unfollowing that one account that always seems to trigger your negativity spiral. Remember, you have the power to choose.